Welcome to the Strong for Performance podcast, where we give coaches and consultants practical ideas for taking you to the next level in your business and in your life. I'm your host, Meredith Bell. I interview experts who've walked in your shoes and offer real-world experience that you can apply to your own journey. Welcome to another episode of the Strong for Performance podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and today I have a very special guest with me, Denny Coates, who has been my business partner for the past 30 years. Denny, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm so excited to have you with me today because, I've done a lot of interviews and you're one of my favorite people to talk to. So this is going to be just a wonderful episode. Before we jump into our conversation, I want to let my listeners know more about who you are. Denny is a graduate of West Point. He was a 20-year career officer in the U.S. Army, and he spent 1 year in Vietnam during that time. He retired as a lieutenant colonel. And during his years in the Army, he served in many leadership positions. He taught leadership to mid-career officers and ROTC candidates before retiring. He also wrote manuals for how to train and how to manage training. And this became his specialty after retiring, this whole area of training and development. Denny also earned his PhD at Duke University, and I think it is safe to say he is an over-the-top Duke basketball fan. During the basketball season, that is his number one favorite topic to talk about. Denny is, one thing I admire so much about him, he is a prolific writer. If he's not writing at his computer, he's writing in his head a lot of times. He's published books recently for parents on communicating effectively with their kids and helping their teens develop a superior mind. But for many years, Denny and I have both worked with the corporate arena, in particular adults in the workplace. And today we're going to be talking about a new book that he and I co-authored called Connect with Your Team, Mastering the Top 10 Communication Skills. And Denny, one of the things you and I discussed was the idea that people would have questions about, wow, there's so many books out there on this topic of communication. Let's start out by discussing what's different about this book and the important things we felt needed to be addressed.
Well, you're right, Meredith. Since 1970, there have been many really good books about communication skills. One of my favorites is Just Listen by Mark Goulston. And I could name quite a few others. And so it's obvious, why do we need yet another book on communication in the workplace? And we've talked about this, and we felt that there are several reasons why we should do this. And one of them is negotiating, listening, conflict resolution, feedback. All these are really important topics, and there are books written about them. But the truth is, there are dozens of so-called people skills, interpersonal skills that are important in the workplace. So what we did is we decided to say, well, what are the top 10? What are the 10 most important? Because you really can't learn all these skills at once. You have to learn them essentially one at a time. And just reading about it isn't going to do it. You're going to have to practice like any skill before you own it. And so it'll take forever to master all the various people skills that there are. So we decided let's focus on the 10 most important skills, the ones that have the biggest impact on one-on-one encounters in the workplace. So in a way, that's what makes this book different, is it focuses on 10 different skills. And several of them have never been focused on in any way at all. For example, you and I have assessed and taught different skills, such as how to encourage. And I think we're the only ones who've considered encouragement as a learnable skill. I mean, everybody knows you have to encourage, and we kind of have to do that when people need it. It's a good thing. But is it a skill? And we believe that it is, and that's one of the chapters in the book. And we also have a section on expressing empathy. By the way, Mark Goldstein focuses on empathy in his book, but we decided that it was actually an important skill. So it's a skill that you could learn and practice and master, and that it's important. So there are new skills in this book, and I think that's one of the things that makes the book unique. Actually, the way it's structured is different. We think of it as a guide, a coaching guide, sort of a paperback coach, if you will. So the book itself provides encouragement. It explains what to do, and that's really mostly what it does. So it's like having that coach right there with you all the time, and that's what you need when you're learning a new skill. So that's why we wrote the book this way, and that's why I think it's needed and different.
I really want to emphasize one of the things that you mentioned there, because it isn't an academic book. It's not theoretical or conceptual. It's very practical. So someone that wants to pick it up, let's say a leader, because leadership development is so critical. And many times leaders are focused on more managerial types of things, managing projects, and not so much the interaction with the people that they're working with. How do I go about interacting with them in a way that's really going to be most effective? And I guess this would be a good time to address this idea of soft skills, because a lot of times the topics that we've chosen for this book are kind of lumped into soft skills. But in reality, these are hard skills. If they weren't so hard, everybody would do them well. We wouldn't have needed this book, but most of the time we're aware that people are focused a lot more on getting things done than how they're speaking to someone, how they're coming across. And I think in particular, leaders who want to inspire others to perform at their best need to be really conscious of their listening skills. How am I coming across to this other person? Am I really hearing not just the word they're saying, but how they're looking when they say it? How are they standing? What's their body language? What's their tone of voice? Are they sounding confident? Are they hesitant? Noticing all of these elements are really a critical part of communicating effectively, and for a leader, bringing out the best in others. Because when we're looking at how do we increase performance, this ability to come across as an encouraging person, not parental, not judgmental, not critical, but encouraging. And I think that's something unique in the tone of our book. It's looking at how can we assist others in being their best.
Meredith, that reminds me of a story. I don't know if I've ever told you this story. When I was in the middle of my career in the Army, I was asked to compete for a White House fellowship. about a dozen talented future leaders get selected for the White House Fellowship. And I thought, why not give it a try? So I showed up at the regional competition where about 30 people in my region of the US showed up to be interviewed and talked to and so forth. So they could pick two out of the 30 to go to the finals in Washington, D.C. And I told one of my friends, who is one of my mentors in leadership, and he said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you a tip. He said, when you go in there, they're going to have some exercises, probably in a group. And this is going to be an opportunity for people to look smart. So around the table, there will be people chiming in with how smart they are and what they know. In other words, talking about the content of various issues. And he told me, he said, if you want to stand out as a leader, don't do that. He said, the trick is to encourage others to talk. And so, sure enough, he was right. You know, we got into this exercise where there's this round table and about 12 or 13 really smart young people in their 30s. The monitor asked a question about an issue. It might have been the 3 Mile Island disaster or something like that. And people started chiming in, just like he said. So one guy stood up and started gesturing with his hands. And so when he took a breath, I said, John, those are fantastic points, but you know what? I'm looking at Jane over there, and it just looks like she's got something to say. Jane, what are you thinking about? And so Jane woke up and started talking. And I did that a couple of times. And guess who was among the two that were selected to go to the finals?
You, I am guessing, were one of them.
That's right. I showed leadership. I showed leadership because I encouraged others. I used communication skill at the time. So I think that's an interesting story, illustrating the power of communicating effectively to bring the best out of your team that you can get.
Yes. You know, Denny, I love that story. And no, you had told me about the fellowship competition, but you didn't tell me about that specific instance. So that's beautiful, because what that made me start thinking about is I think a lot of leaders feel that they need to be having all the answers all the time. And one of the points that is a takeaway from what you just said is part of what we talk about in this book. We have a whole chapter on getting others to think and learn from lessons of experiences they've had maybe that didn't go so well. And this idea that the leader has to feel like I've got to have the answers instead of allowing others the opportunity to learn to speak by asking questions. You just illustrated that beautifully with that example. And I think that's a huge takeaway for listeners who are in a leadership role.
You know, Meredith, what you've been saying is just really how important it is for the person in charge to connect well with all of the other team members. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, the team members have to connect well with each other.
Yes.
Now, we all know that there are bad bosses, right? Or we call them jerks. And they have a lot to learn, and they're making all kinds of mistakes. But the same mistakes can be made on interpersonal relations among the team members. And that makes it hard for a team to be a team. It makes it hard for them to do their best, to cooperate with each other, to collaborate. So our belief is that this book is not just for leaders. It's a book we wrote for everyone on the team. Now, if it's a middle management team and it's made up of one of the middle managers and line supervisors, fine, or it could be the supervisors connecting with the staff, the workers, and the workers connecting with each other. So our belief is everybody needs to learn this. And of course, where do supervisors and leaders come from? You see, many of them come from working their way as team members, showing leadership acumen and talent. And so they get selected, and so they become managers themselves someday. But it's really a book for leaders and their teams.
Yeah, that was something that we made a decision about early on. We didn't want to choose one group over the other because it all works together, and that's why it's really connect with your team, up, down, across, everywhere. And the other thing that I was thinking as you were talking is, even though we don't really use the word, I don't think anywhere in the book, emotional intelligence, that's really a lot of what we're talking about here too, because emotional intelligence, as you know, has two components: this managing your own emotions internally, and then also managing your emotions as you interact with other people.
Right.
And the skills that we cover here really require both of those aspects of emotional intelligence for someone to really be able to connect well and interact well with others.
That's right. It is definitely about that aspect of work. It's a big aspect, and I think organizations really are starting to pay more attention to that. You know, this reminds me of something going on these days. You hear a lot about how the young people, the young adults that are coming into the workplace from the service, from college, and wherever they come from, and they're called millennials, because in this millennium, so far in the 21st century, these people have never been without technology. That was not true for me. You know, when I was that young,
Me either.
there were no PC. In fact, it's not true of my sons, who are now in their 50s. They grew up at the advent of the PC. The very first PCs is when they were very young. So this is a new thing. How do you know, what's it like to grow up with a smartphone? It's amazing. Now, one of the things they say about millennials is that they're different in one way, in that they don't have great interpersonal skills. And they say, well, that's because they interact with the screen, this smartphone, instead of a real person in real time, face to face. You know, they're comfortable sending text messages, and they'll do it for them. That's what they say. And I'll tell you this. I've known lots of so-called millennials, and none of them are the same. There's a stereotype out there. They're all different. I mean, they are. And they're different in every way you can imagine. And of course, that's the way people are. People are different. They're actually different in many, many ways. A lot more different than they are the same, my opinion. But I think it's true that millennials, at least as much as everybody else, have a lot to learn about communicating with each other. And if they can't do that very well, it's going to be a detriment to their success. I know one young man who I watched him grow up. And my first contact with him, I introduced myself to him and held my hand out, and he didn't know how to shake hands. It's just something he didn't know how to do. So I tried to teach him how to shake hands. It didn't go very well, but you know, he's in university studying computer science. Perfect for him, but he still doesn't have very good interpersonal skills. So we're hoping for the best for him. Maybe he'll make friends. He'll have more and more one-on-one contact with people, which would be great. But hey, this book, it's a perfect thing to use with these young people who really need a boost in learning vital interpersonal communication skills.
Well, you know, Denny, listening to you talk about millennials and really everyone in the workplace, I'm thinking about another aspect of this book that I think was part of our motivation for writing it, which was that it could be, as you mentioned earlier, a coaching tool for people in and of itself. But really, the idea of coaching in general is so important. When you think of athletes getting coaching, you know, on how to do better with their skills in the workplace, coaches in the past have been limited more to outside coaches that come in and work with the executives or upper levels of management, or maybe even getting training if it's a larger organization for some people to serve as internal coaches. But still, they typically work with management level. And what we're hoping is to really get this message throughout the whole organization for people to become peer coaches with each other, so that as they're learning these skills together, they can support each other, so that they have all got kind of the same handbook on how do we do this well? What does it look like if I'm listening well? What does it look like if I'm giving feedback well? Or what's taught even less, how to receive feedback graciously. That was a very important, I think, chapter for us to include. As people learn these skills at the same time, then they can serve as coaches to each other in a supportive way, so that they become really, you know, that term learning organization. They're all learning together how to be more effective, with the goal, of course, in increasing performance, because they are communicating effectively. They're being efficient. They're being healthy in the way they interact with each other. And I think that's so important. The other thing, just to add on what we've done that I think is unique in this book, is emphasize the positive, like a chapter on expressing appreciation. Most folks have never been taught how important that is. You mentioned encouragement earlier. I think these are important pieces overall, so that the coaching done by peers is balanced.
Meredith, I'd like to add something to that business of peer coaching. Obviously, if you're going to get this kind of development of interpersonal skills down to the team level, in order for them to really improve, they're going to need that kind of coaching. Just can't afford to have professional coaches come in and help do that. But they need it. They need it because the practice that goes on must go on for weeks and months until whatever skill that they're practicing, learning, is wired in their brain. That's how skills become skills, is through repetition. And when the brain actually connects into circuits, it takes time. Mm-hmm. But when it happens, it's a permanent thing. You've got a skill, you own it, and you can do it actually without trying. It just becomes your habit. And that's what we're shooting for. But it takes some coaching and someone who will provide accountability, encouragement, reminding them of what to do. And as I said before, you just can't get professionals in to do it. People need to coach each other. That's the answer. And so the point I want to make is that all 10 of those skills are not only vital to leadership and vital to team interaction, but those are skills for coaches, peer coaches. You say, well, I've never been a peer coach. Well, that's this book right here could be thought of as a manual for peer coaches, because listening is a part of peer coaching, giving feedback is part of peer coaching, and giving encouragement is part of peer coaching. Most of the skills in here have to do with coaching. So you're coaching your team, you're coaching each other, you're coaching someone who's trying to learn a skill. So it's a very versatile book.
Well, it is. And I think one of the things that you just brought up is so important for people to realize, and we do emphasize this in one of our earlier chapters before we get into the 10 skills, is it's going to take time to wire your brain for this skill. Because the truth is, every one of the skills we talk about, people are coming to this book already having a way of doing that skill. You know, they've wired their brain for that specific way of doing it over time. It's not like learning a brand new thing like a musical instrument you've never played before, or playing a sport for the first time. This is something you've already got wiring for, and so you've got competition in your brain for the old way you've done it. And I'm so glad you mentioned the importance of practice. And I think a part of that is giving yourself permission to, you know, give yourself some slack as you're learning a new way to do something, and getting support from others. I remember years ago, Denny, and I've told this story before, when you were interrupting me or our other partner, Paula, at times when we would talk. And so we developed some ways to support you in breaking that habit. And we did things like just say, please let me finish. And even today, or last week, I guess, the three of us were in a meeting and I started to jump in and you simply said, I'm not done yet. And that was my cue. So we've learned to coach each other over these 30 years for ways that support our development and help us stay aware of what needs to be done. But I think that whole thing of rewiring our brains is an important aspect to bring up here.
I'll tell you what, everybody needs coaching.
That's right.
Everybody, even the best of the best. I was watching the U.S. Open yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I don't know if you know this, but this young 20-something professional golfer named Bryson DeChambeau won the tournament.
Yes.
He was the only golfer there who's had a subpar, that is to say under par, round that day. And he's the only one who had a cumulative total for the 4 rounds that was under par. Everybody else couldn't break par, but he did. And here's the thing. He didn't have the greatest round that he wanted to have on the 3rd day. He was not leading. A fellow who's younger than he is was leading. And so he really knew that he had to improve the way he was driving the ball. And that night, Saturday night,
I saw that.
At 10 o'clock in total darkness with a spotlight, he was out on the driving range with his coach, hitting one golf ball after the other into the darkness. He was the only one in the whole field. Here he was almost in the lead. And here he's the only one practicing, okay, and following the coaching that he had. So the best of the best, they need it. Tiger Woods in his prime, he always had a coach, paid a lot of money for a coach. Coaches are just really an important part of the process. That's why we wrote the book the way it is. So it could be a coaching reference, a coaching guide, and a way for peer coaches to be better at what they do.
Yes, and as a good way to kind of wrap this up, I'd like to leave listeners with another tip, and that is take the initiative and ask. And that's one of the things we emphasize in our chapter on accepting feedback, is asking for it initially. How can I improve the way and then ask about whatever the skill is that you want to be better at, even to how can I be a better team member? How can I be a better leader? Just asking other people what you can do to improve is a way for you to be receptive to receiving coaching. And it's a great way of giving others permission to be honest with you, so that when it's your turn to give them feedback or express appreciation, you're able to do that more easily. This has been a great conversation, Denny. I hope my listeners will appreciate all the important points that we've brought up here today, because I think that learning how to be coaches to each other is essential going forward because of what's happened with the coronavirus. Some people working from home permanently, some going back in the office, some having a hybrid situation. Whether we are in person together or working, through Zoom or some other online platform, we still need coaching with each other. It's an essential element of performing at our best. Was there anything else you'd like to add, Denny, before we wrap up?
Oh, well, thanks for this opportunity, Meredith. It was fun writing this book with you, and it's fun talking about it. So again, thanks.
Well, thank you for being with me, Denny. You're one of my favorite people in the whole world, and I feel so lucky to have gotten to work with you these last 30 years. We've kind of grown, I won't say grown old together, grown older together. And what's so cool is we are as excited as we've ever been about our work and the impact that our books and our assessment and development products can have on others. And if you're interested in getting a copy of the book, remember it's called Connect with Your Team, Mastering the Top 10 Communication Skills. Thank you, Denny. I appreciate your being with me today. Thanks for tuning in to the Strong for Performance podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com to learn how our tools can increase your impact with clients and expand your business. And while you're there, grab our free ebook, The 5 Secrets to Getting Better at Anything. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell. Make it a great day.